This is the Recruit the Employer podcast, and you're listening to episode 96. Ready to escape the 9-to-5? Start here. Welcome to the Recruit the Employer podcast, a show for the ambitious, action-oriented career woman who wants to live out her purpose, rise to the top of her industry, and be seen as a leader at work. In 30 minutes or less, we'll walk you through the latest strategies to land your dream job, blast through imposter syndrome, and make the money you deserve. I'm your host, Jena, ex-Wall Streeter turned career coach and founder of Recruit the Employer. But more importantly, I'm on a mission to help you fall in love with your work again. So grab a glass of wine, get ready to be coached, and tune in to your weekly boost of career confidence. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Recruit the Employer podcast. I am so excited to be here with my friend, Katie, and we're going to be chatting about a subject that we don't typically talk about on Recruit the Employer. Typically, we're talking about leadership development for corporate women. We're talking about changing jobs, but today we are kind of going along with this theme that we've started here in March, and we're going to be talking about what it looks like to launch your own business. We've seen definitely an influx of interest in this in the past year with COVID and everything that's going on in the world. And so we wanted to make sure that we brought you some information and just some expertise around this. And Katie is one of those experts. So Katie, thank you so much for joining us on Recruit the Employer today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Why don't you share with our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do? Because I know we've become friends through actually Amber Gentry, who has been on this podcast before. Her and her husband married my husband and me, so that we know them from way back in New York days. But that's how we connected. But share with the audience what do you do and who you are?
Yeah, and we actually know the Gentrys from way back before they even lived in New York, from when we all lived in Austin together, which was precisely 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's such a pleasure to get to know you through them and get to know what you're doing here with Recruit the Employer. I think you're just meeting a huge need. But what I do is I'm a business coach for people who want to build a profitable business around their skills and their passions. So I work with
I love.
I work with a lot of creatives, other coaches, people that are consultants, but all service providers, people that are building businesses around the skill set that they have, mostly solopreneurs as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think that a lot of people that if you're listening, you may be thinking like, I can't monetize anything. I don't have anything to monetize. Well, newsflash, what you're doing in your corporate job, you could monetize in a solopreneur way. So this conversation very much is for you. If you've ever been intrigued or interested about how do you actually go about doing that, Katie and I are going to go through I have some questions for her and just to kind of break down what does it look like to actually start a business? Is it possible? Who is it possible for? But before we get into that, I like to ask this question. What's a fun fact about you that someone wouldn't know from looking at your social media profiles?
So I'm actually a very, very avid cook. I love cooking. It's a huge interest of mine, has been. I actually probably back in like 2008 or 9 had a cooking blog.
Oh, really?
It wasn't particularly successful, but it was like just kind of a hobby blog. And I don't talk about it much on social media just because I don't do a lot of lifestyle type stuff on my social media because I just don't have the interest. But I'm very thankful that I love cooking so much because I do have to, have kids. I have a husband and they like eating and I like eating. So I have to do it a lot, but I don't talk about it much.
What's your go-to dish?
I don't really have one because I like cooking a lot of different things. Some of the things I love cooking the most are like anything that is all in one pot. So like curry and stew and things that cook for a long time. This Friday, I actually did post a cooking Instagram story on Friday, just for the heck of it. And I made pork carnitas.
Oh, so good.
I'm a native Texan, but I now find myself living in Washington, D.C., where there is basically no decent Mexican food. And so I made pork carnitas and it was just awesome.
I love that. My husband is also an avid cook and I have not made one meal since we've gotten married. Literally not one meal since we've gotten married. So you guys would have a lot in common to talk about.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
He's all about that chili life. So we have chili probably like every other week, if not once a week. And it just like carries for so many days. It's awesome.
Chili's amazing.
Chili's so good. While we could totally talk about food, and maybe we should do a whole podcast episode about lifestyle stuff for once, just because it's fun. I want to hear a little bit more though of your story of starting your business just from scratch. I know that a lot of people feel like they need capital to start a business. Or Jena, I'm so interested. I posted this actually on LinkedIn where I said, what's holding you back from starting a business? And a lot of people were saying capital and having money to start it. And I'm like, oh, I wish you knew that you really didn't need that much money. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. I mean, we're speaking specifically about service-based businesses today,
yes.
Because obviously if you want to start a product line or anything where you're having to manufacture something, then you probably will need capital. And listen, capital is great. If you have it, use it. If you have, some funding that you can put towards your business, like by all means, leverage it because you have to use what you have. But I personally didn't have any capital when I started my business. A lot of people didn't have any capital when they started theirs. I started back in 2017 and I had spent the previous 6 years of my life doing two very, very all-consuming things. The first was having kids. I had my first child in 2011 and my second child in 2013. And I in that intervening time, I was still working, but I became a contractor for my old job or for my job. And so that was like the one consuming thing that I had been doing. And the other consuming thing that I had been doing previous to that was supporting my husband through a really major career change. He started out as a lawyer and, then became a pastor. And then we moved overseas for international work. And now
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Now he's working here in Washington, DC, doing nonprofit advocacy. So that process of supporting that career change required a lot of energy and effort on the part of the entire family. It also required us to move twice in 2 years. So we moved from Austin to Israel.
Wow. That's a big change.
It was significant. And then 18 months later, we moved from Israel to DC.
Wow.
So we had never lived in DC. We didn't have any connections in DC besides, a couple of friends. And then obviously the people, my husband was working with. So we came here for that job. So here, I found myself, I'm in Washington, DC. I don't have a job. I don't have any connections. I don't have any friends. We don't have a place to live. I don't have a car. We don't have we don't have anything. I literally just had my laptop, which also was a hand-me-down from my husband's old job. So I wasn't just starting my business from scratch. I was literally starting my whole life from scratch.
Your whole life. Dang, that's so good.
And I didn't have childcare at the time either, but our kids were 3 and 5 when we moved to DC. And I couldn't enroll them in school because we didn't have a house. We didn't have a place to live. So,
oh my gosh. So where were you staying?
So we had a temporary, we had a place where we were staying for 2 months that was arranged through the job that we moved here for. So that was like we weren't on the streets. We had shelter.
The people.
We had shelter, but it was not permanent.
Gotcha.
And so, in that time, I knew I wanted to start my business. I knew that this kind of fresh start, while it was difficult, was also an opportunity to do something that I had previously not had the capacity or really the will to do. And so I just said, I'm going to work 1 hour a day on this, sometimes more, but never less. I'm going to put 1 hour a day into this business. And so the way I started with no capital, I had this computer and that was it, was I just emailed everyone in my contact list. I made this big, long list of everybody in my life, basically.
Yeah.
And I emailed them all. I didn't send a mass email. It was individual notes to all of these people. I think I challenged myself to do 5 a day. Yeah. And I said, I'm starting this business. I'm going to be helping small businesses do these things. I don't even remember what I said I was going to help people do. I think it was probably the worst niche statement ever. But I said, this is what I'm trying to do. And I was in this place, and that a lot of people probably that are thinking about starting a business are in this place too, of you have these skills.
Right.
And I had spent 10 years as a corporate consultant doing strategy and planning and financial analysis. So I knew I had skills that could help people, but I didn't exactly know how it was going to be turned into a business.
Right.
But just taking, kind of using what I had, which was a little bit of time, and my network and like, the internet, I was able to take those action steps that set everything into motion and revealed kind of the path ahead.
I love that. I mean, I think that's just a testament to you can start with nothing in your, and I'm very similar. I was working, a new job. I was like all in on that job. I was working a lot of hours. I was living in New York. I had a social life at the time. Like I was very busy, but I did the same thing where my business started out as a side hustle, which essentially is kind of what yours did as well. Right.
Yeah.
So my business started as a side hustle and I would put like a couple of hours a week into it and just slowly start to build it. And I think that, why do you feel like for yourself, and I can answer it for me, but that you felt this drive to start a business? Because I think there's questions people will have for themselves. Like, can I do this? Like, am I like this, almost this imposter syndrome? Like, who do I think I am to start a business? Like, did you ever experience that?
Oh my gosh. Yes. I mean, I still do.
Yeah.
I love Seth. I'm a huge Seth Godin fan. And one of the things that he says that has always stuck with me is that imposter syndrome doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means that you're actually like quite normal and well-adjusted.
Yeah. If you didn't ever have imposter syndrome, then you probably
you would be a sociopath. Yes, exactly. I take a lot of comfort in that, but I started the business for the same reason a lot of people start their businesses and it's because you want the freedom and flexibility of being an entrepreneur, because traditional employment was not working for me.
Mm-hmm. In what ways?
And I was not the corporate burnout person. I actually had a great corporate experience. I had great coworkers, a healthy culture.
Right.
Like I didn't have any particular negative, negative experiences that was like, oh, I got to get out of this. But I didn't see, I had children, I had young children. I didn't want to do the travel. I didn't see myself working 40 hours, 50 weeks a year,
right,
for the foreseeable future as a parent of children. And I also didn't see a path. I saw how the other like quote unquote part-time, which I hate the part-time, full-time thing. I think it's dumb.
Yeah.
37 studies say that a 40-hour work week is arbitrary and unnecessary. And yet we like have this caste system of part-time, full-time. That's ridiculous, but that's another soapbox.
Well, I mean, I'm with you there. I even think that, I read a book called Rest. I've talked about it a lot on this podcast, but it talks about how like people really only really work 4 hours a day. Like we really only work 4 hours a day. The rest is kind of fluff. Yeah. It's scrolling through Instagram. It's having conversations. It's like, we're only really doing deep work about 4 hours a day, if that. So I'm totally with you there.
Yes. So I just didn't see a path for me in my corporate job where I could really be ambitious and also have the lifestyle that was important to me. So it wasn't that I couldn't work there. I could work there, but I couldn't work there and have the opportunities that I wanted to have the respect that I wanted to have from my colleagues, be able to advance in my career. It was like, you can work here and be a part-time person, or you can be full-time and then have this whole universe of options open to you. So that was really what led me to say, I want to create something for myself where I can still be ambitious, but in the lifestyle that I want to have, and be able to, be with my kids after school and take time off when I need to take time off, or, all of that stuff. So it was definitely the freedom and flexibility thing that drew me to it. But I absolutely dealt with imposter syndrome. I was trying to be a business coach and I didn't have a business.
Yeah.
So
how did you deal? But I think that's really interesting because you did have business experience. So I was actually doing a on-air coaching call with somebody. I'm like, you've actually had like 12 years of experience doing this thing, maybe not to this specific market, but you've done the thing for a long time. Don't think you're starting at day one with no experience or nothing underneath your belt. What have you been doing for the past 10 years? So what made you decide to do business coaching specifically?
Yeah, I think I did. I liked my corporate job. I liked the types of things that I was doing. I liked.
You just didn't like the red tape.
I didn't want the kind of the structure of the corporate world, and I also wasn't that enthused about the clientele that I was working with. It wasn't very exciting to me. A lot of my clients were governmental entities, and specifically public utilities. So we would help large public utilities become more efficient from like a business standpoint, because public utilities are like little businesses that are inside of the government.
Right.
And so public utilities are quite necessary and important for society. You know, we all need water and our toilets to flush and all of those things, but public utilities don't change a lot. They don't innovate. Right. They don't do a ton. They study things. And so we did a lot of studies and a lot of analysis and then nothing ever happened. So I hated that.
Right.
And I knew
it wasn't there.
I knew that if I went to small business, it would be the opposite. You know, it would be constantly moving, constantly changing, constantly implementing. And so that's where I wanted to go. I wanted to work directly with business owners, but I didn't really know any of the specifics. Like I didn't know I was going to focus on service-based businesses. I didn't know I was going to have a lot of, focus on creative. And I didn't even really, I knew I had like this skill set, but specifically how that was going to translate to an offer and to a service that I could say, I can do these things for you and it will cost this amount of money. Do you want to buy this thing? I didn't know all of that stuff yet.
Which I think a lot of people don't. Like when they start, and I was actually talking to somebody who is a career coach that we're potentially going to be working together to help her launch her business. And she said, I've been thinking about launching it for a long time. I said, well, until you charge for it, it's still just a hobby for you. And she was like, oh, I didn't think about it like that. I'm like, yeah, it's still a hobby. You haven't charged anything for what you've done. We need to do some mindset work around the pricing piece of it. But yeah, I'm totally with you there. Now, for people that are listening to this, they're like, okay, I'm like looking back at my corporate job. I'm seeing that maybe there's some things I do like doing XYZ things. I also want, like Katie and Jena, the flexibility and the freedom to kind of make my own hours. But am I the right type of person to start a business? And I am a firm believer that I don't think everybody is designed to start a business. So for you, who do you think is like the right type of person to start a business or to launch their own thing?
Yeah. I think that what I have learned, and I'm probably different people would answer this question differently. Yeah. I'm not the type of person that thinks there's a certain personality that you have to have, because I think that our personalities are far more malleable than we give ourselves credit for, and that you can develop the character and the skills that you need in order to have a business. But one of the things that I think I have learned through my experience and watching other people is that if all you want is a flexible job, it would be probably a lot easier to go out and find a flexible job than to build a business. Because I think a lot of people come into entrepreneurship, and I was one of them, because I needed that freedom and flexibility for where I was in my life. But to sustain an actual business long-term, you need to want more than just a flexible job and a flexible lifestyle. You need to, like, if you are going to spend 5, 7, 10, 15 years building a business, you need to be really passionate about building a business.
Right.
And otherwise I don't think it's worth it.
Yeah. I think so with you there.
There's a lot easier ways to have a flexible lifestyle and make money than building a small business.
Yeah. I think for me, I wanted the flexibility for sure. That was a big thing. Freedom and flexibility was a big thing. I think I went from like super corporate, huge company investment banking to the New York Stock Exchange, which was a little bit smaller, but very corporate in structure, to the Muse, which was a startup, and watching that grow. And then I petered off into my own thing. I was like slowly going towards freedom.
Yeah.
But I do agree with you. I think that a lot of people have the Instagram reel version of what entrepreneurship looks like. And it is fun. It is really exciting, but it is a lot of work if you want to build a long-standing, sustaining business. The other thing that I would say is what I have found when working with a lot of people, if you really enjoy structure, entrepreneurship probably isn't for you. Like if you really crave structure and you like the fact that you can move up within an organization and the comfort with that entrepreneurship probably isn't for you. And that's okay. That's why we do what we do over at Recruit the Employer. And I also think that the other piece for launching your own business is if you want to be in creative control of your future, but also the projects that you work on. For me, that was a really, really big thing that I couldn't get at an organization that I was working for at the time. Right. Yeah. So I really wanted to be like, no, I want to move this project forward. I'm going to do it in my own business now.
I was really motivated by that too, because I had no control over what I was working on. And my boss, my boss is was responsible for selling enough work to keep his employees busy. That was his motivation. Mm-hmm. And so what he would do is we would do a project for one city, and then he would want to go sell that same type of work to 10 other cities and say, look, we did this one thing for city X. We can do it for you. And so I would literally be doing the same thing in a different geography over and over and over. And I hated it. Mm-hmm. So I definitely, that's a huge motivator to me. But I think that, when you're talking about the type of person that's right to be an entrepreneur, I definitely think that you can learn to do the things that you need to do. But there are certain things that you just simply have to learn how to do. You have to be self-motivated. Mm-hmm. It's a mindset. It's a lot of character stuff, personal development stuff, and mindset stuff. You have to be able to validate yourself. I don't know if this actually happened, so I probably shouldn't repeat it, but I saw that somebody said that Elon Musk said on Clubhouse, hearsay, that he was asked the question on Clubhouse, what encouragement do you have for entrepreneurs? And he said, if you need encouragement, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur. And there's some, that's harsh. And Elon Musk is, a unique person. Yeah. But he's all the way in a different field. There's a certain truth to that. I think you have to be willing to take responsibility. You have to be willing to fail. Mm-hmm. That you cannot refuse, you cannot sit in perfectionism and be a successful entrepreneur. You have to be willing to try something that fails. And you also really have to be patient. Which is my hardest thing. I think for you too, probably as an Enneagram 3, that's my biggest struggle as an entrepreneur is the patience. Yeah, because some things take a long time. Most things take a lot longer than you think. Mm-hmm. That take a lot longer than you think they're going to. But I don't think you need to be some sort of naturally confident, naturally charismatic, extroverted, fancy MBAs. I don't have an MBA. No. You don't have to have all of the kind of external things that people might associate with an entrepreneur. Yeah, I'm so with you there. And I think that if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, we either scared you and you're like, entrepreneurship's not for me. Or you're like, okay, I'm intrigued. I'm interested more. But I've actually heard this from a couple of people that I've been chatting with that are launching their own businesses is around that imposter syndrome piece of I'm worried what my siblings are going to say about me when I start posting things online, when I start building this. I'm worried what my coworkers are going to think about me. Did you experience that same fear and how did you get over it? I definitely did. I had a little bit of an advantage in that because I was in a brand new place and I didn't know anybody. Right. I didn't have as much of that weird transition, right? Because when you go from being one thing to being like, hey, do this now with the people that they're kind of like, what? Yeah. Or at least that's how you perceive that they're thinking about you, right? Mm-hmm. So with the people that I was immediately around in my city, it was just like, oh, I'm this. And as far as they knew, I was always that. Right. But I definitely had those concerns about the people that I used to work with and all of my friends and family on social media and all of that stuff, even though everything that they said was so supportive. Right. Right. So it's just something that the reason why we experience imposter syndrome is because there is an inherent disconnect between the thing that we have. You have to fully step into what you are trying to be. Yep. But you aren't that thing yet. Right. I had to fully step into the identity of I'm a business coach. Yep. But I didn't have any clients yet. But I wouldn't have ever gotten clients until you called yourself a business coach. I called myself a business coach. So living in that disconnect is why we experience imposter syndrome, because we feel fake, because we have to fully step into something before we can be that. That's good. So just knowing what it is and why you experience it is really important, but also knowing that the antidote to imposter syndrome is just doing the thing that you think you aren't worthy or deserving of, because it's pretty easy to argue. It's really easy for the voice in your head to say, you're not really a business coach when you have no clients. But when you have you're like, it's validated here. It's validated. When you have 5 clients and the little voice is like, you're not really a business coach. You're like, well, I am though. I have all these clients. Right. So that is the only solution is just action and moving forward and doing the thing that you think you can't do, that you think you're not worthy of.
Hi there, friends. Jena here again. Let me guess. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not looking for any job. You're looking for the right job. And the right job is not at your current company. You're tired of feeling underpaid, overworked, and like your career is in the hands of the employer. You're ready to make some moves, but you're overwhelmed by all of the options, don't know how to sell yourself, and have a nagging feeling that your lack of confidence is keeping you from success. Not to mention negotiating the amount you're worth. If this sounds like you and you're a mid to senior level career woman who makes over $100,000, we have the 5-step solution just for you. Our signature program, Recruit the Employer, is designed to help women leaders get clarity on what they want to do, market to their dream jobs, and negotiate thousands more. Using a personal branded approach, we equip you with the tools to sell yourself in a non-sleazy way, think like a C-suite leader, and ultimately take back control of your career. To apply, head on over to recruittheemployer.com/call. Over the course of 6 months, you'll network with other female leaders at similar stages, learn how to double your salary, and solidify your career story. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, that dreaded resume and LinkedIn profile, yeah, we do that for you. Because of the intimate nature of this program and limited spots, we're really very selective about who we invite into the program. To see if you'd be a good fit, again, head on over to recruittheemployer.com/call to apply today. I think that's that forward motion. I experienced the same thing when I started my career coaching business. I was really worried mostly what people in my investment banking job were going to think of me. Like, why did I care so much? There's a lot of deeper wounds probably from that season of my life that I probably still need to unravel a little bit. But I do remember that feeling of I'm so worried what they're going to say about me, what they're going to think about me. They're going to think I'm crazy. Who do I think that I am? But it was through that forward motion, that taking action against what my brain was telling me in my fight or flight mode, and just taking action anyways, that helped me get over that hump. And then, truth be told, there are different levels, and I'm sure you've experienced this. As we get to the next level in our business, we start to have imposter syndrome about that next level of the business. And it just keeps going, but you at least have the tools now and be like, I can recognize what this is. I can move forward in that, and it's not going to kill me.
Yeah. And I think it's also really important to there's another tension too of knowing that you have valuable skills that you're bringing to the table and being generous with yourself about that. It's like being generous with yourself about the things that you're great at doing, while also knowing, like, when you're doing something new, like starting a business, even when you have a business background, like you can have a business background and really not know a ton about starting your own business. Yeah. And being very open and honest with yourself and with others about what is new to you. Like, it's okay. I think we have this idea that when we're starting a business that we have to put up this front, like everything is perfect and that we know everything, but that's not true at all. It's totally fine for you to say, I'm just getting started. So I'm still working on my website. So my website's not finished yet. People are like, oh, great. That's reasonable. That's cool. Yeah. And it's totally fine to say, like, I'm learning the basics of social media and I'm learning how I might be able to use it for my business. So I don't post a lot of business content yet. Or, I've only worked with a few clients so far. So I'm still refining my processes and my workflows. I'd love your feedback on how this process has worked for you. I think you have the freedom to say, like, my skills are really valuable. And also I'm really new at this. And those two things can coexist.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good word for somebody. So if somebody is listening to this and they're thinking to themselves, okay, I'm convinced that I actually do have some skill sets. I want to start my business. The big question that people always come is like, oh, I don't have a website yet. You kind of touched on it. Do you think you need a website to start a business?
No, business existed before the internet, before websites, before social media, before the printing press. Right. Business existed. And I think that this exposes one of the big mistakes that people make when they're like, when you finally make that decision, like, I'm doing this, I'm going to start this business. Yeah. People get really focused, especially the types of clients that I work with, which I work with a lot of creatives. They get really focused on what it looks like. The visuals, the branding. Which does matter to an extent, for sure, but it's not when you're first starting out. It's not irrelevant. Yes. It's not irrelevant. It is relevant. Like, you will, when you build a successful business, you will need all of those things. Right. But people will get bogged down in it and be like, oh, I'm launching this business, but I've been working on the website for a long time. I'm not ready to launch it yet. It's been 6 months. And that's the thing that's like, I can't really start yet because it's only official when I have this website up.
Right.
And it kind of goes back to this idea of like, people know that you're just getting started. Yeah. And it's okay that you're just getting started. They don't expect you to have, a $1,500 branding shoot when you're just getting started. So I say, like, if you have the resources to devote to those visuals, that's great. But if you don't, focus on just doing the bare minimum that you need to get some clients in the door, serve those clients really, really well, and create a truly excellent experience for them. And that's where your capital is going to come from. Is from your clients. And a lot of, if you are familiar with kind of business lingo, you might be familiar with the term minimum viable product. And it's this term, I think it came from the tech world. And in the tech world, it's basically create the simplest possible version of the software or the app that you want to make and get it into people's hands quickly so that you can get the real world feedback that you need to make the real version. And I think that's the mindset we need to adopt when we're starting service-based businesses too, of like, what's the simplest possible version of this business that you can create so that you can get clients quickly and get the feedback that you need to figure out what the next version is going to be. I'm working with some clients now who are starting a functional medicine practice. And, they came to me and they were experiencing challenges because they were like, we have the long-term plan of what we want this functional medicine clinic to look like, but we don't know, like, step A, how do we get there? And so what I helped them do was create, like, what's the minimum viable product of this functional medicine clinic? What's the simplest, most stripped down, most basic version of this that we can launch quickly to test the market, prove the concept, and start bringing some money in the door before you double down and invest to go to that next level. And I think that's the mindset you need to take when you're starting a service-based business is, what's the quickest possible path to getting my very first client? Because the best way to start getting the money that you need to build your business is from your business.
Yeah. I love that. I think that what's interesting too, and I've experienced this even for myself, I do think that sometimes the procrastination is just a deeper version of where the fear is, right? Like it's just exposing the fear. For myself, my husband always tells me your procrastination isn't your superpower, Jena. Because I would be like, oh my gosh, I'm like such a procrastinator. I get stuff done at the last minute, but it always gets done. Like it'll get done. And he's like, but actually that's just showing that you're fear of failure. That's why you're not doing the thing. And I think for a lot of people, when they're starting their business, that's that fear that's coming up, and they're using external things like a website to keep on kicking it down the road because we're fearing failure and fearing that it's not actually going to work out. Would you agree that you see that too?
100%. Like it's easier to fiddle around with a logo in Canva for 2 weeks than it is to send an email to your college buddy and say, hey, I'm launching this business and I'm looking for connections. Can you help me? Like you're going to experience a significant amount of resistance to that second thing. And it doesn't take it's not risky at all to fiddle around with a logo.
But it is risky to send out an email.
Yes. And that's
get potentially rejected.
Like, I just had a coaching call this morning with one of my one-on-one clients, and I had asked her, she's launching a new business. I had asked her to get on the phone with some people that meet the description of her ideal client, so she could just ask them some questions that will help her with market research. And she was like, I did not want to do that. Like she experienced so much resistance around this very simple task. And I said, like, normally, like, we are the most afraid to do the things that are actually the most important that we need to be doing. And because there's a risk that you might screw it up. There's a risk that you might fail.
Yeah. That's so true. I mean, I even see that for myself. So we're launching a career journal. This has been a dream of mine for a long time. And I didn't do anything about it for a really long, I'd be dreaming about it. Oh, that's my long-term vision. That's my long-term vision. And then finally we did the minimum viable product. We're going to be releasing it. It's going to print. It literally just got sent off to print yesterday, and it might not be perfect. And that's okay, because we're going to get it in the hands of people to do exactly what you just said, and then get feedback so that we can make the next iteration even better.
Yeah.
So we're still experiencing this as we go farther along in our business. So one, you don't need a website, a perfect website to launch your business. What do you think that you do need, however?
Well, a lot of people think you need an audience. You don't need an audience. You don't need a following.
That's a big one. That's a big one nowadays. It's like, you need this huge following. And like back in the day, maybe that was the case, but the market's changed.
Yeah. I mean, if you, again, use what you have. If you have a big audience or a big following around the topic that you want to launch a business for, use it. Like, for the love, use it.
Yeah. Right.
But you don't have to have it. The most important thing that you need are valuable skills that can help people. Now, there is a difference between launching a business with a brand new skill set to you and launching a business with an existing skill set. If you are a human resources expert and you've been in the corporate world for 20 years and you want to go out on your own and start your own firm, that's going to be a very different process than if you're an engineer and you want to be a wedding photographer and you just bought your first camera 6 months ago. So both are totally possible. Like, you can start a business in both cases, but the process is going to look different, because your focus, if you have a new skill set and you're wanting to build a business around it, is going to first be on developing the skill set. And that's good. That's a good way to focus. So, but if you do have the skills and experience that you need to go ahead and dive headfirst into the business side of things, the next thing that you need is a very, very clear idea of the application of those skills to a particular person.
So explain that a little bit.
So you need to have a one type of client, one type of person in mind that you think is going to be a good, you can add value to that person with your skills. Now, if you're just getting started, you might want to test a few different types of clients. Right. And that's, you should do that.
I did that early on.
I did the same. And I had a few different directions I could go with my skill set, because I had like a few different types of things that I had experience doing, and I wasn't totally sure which one I was going to focus on. Right. So you might have to test a few different things, but the idea is that you will develop an understanding of, I'm going to help one type of person solve one type of problem with my skills. Because most people think, mistakenly, marketing is about getting people's attention. How can I stand out? How can I stand out in a crowded market? How can I get people to pay attention to my business? And that is not what marketing is. Marketing is cultivating a very deep understanding and deep empathy for the person that you're trying to serve, so that you can create products and services and experiences that solve their problems and make their lives better. That's what marketing is. And so focusing on really understanding who you want to serve is the very next thing you should do. And that's a process of trial and error. Right. And I like to use the word testing instead of trial and error, because it makes you feel a little bit better about what you're doing. Like, there's definitely a method behind this. I am not just throwing spaghetti against the wall, but developing a sense of who you want to serve, and then creating a service for them that solves the problem in the best possible way that you know how.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. It's not overcomplicated, but we overcomplicate it because we see all the bells and whistles, and we're like, well, we need to do Instagram reels, and we need to do like 20,000 posts on LinkedIn, and we need to do all these different things, when really you just need the skills. Like you had mentioned, you need to understand who you're serving, and you need to create an awesome service that's going to best serve them and ultimately help them get results.
Yeah. So, and I had an example of this. I have a friend who's in the middle of starting a business. She's becoming a photographer. She is currently learning the skill of photography as she is building the business. Right. And she texted me the other day. She was like, how do I get my website to pop up first on Google? And I was like, okay, back up. Like, you don't even want that right now. Like, do you really want XYZ photography to pop up first when you search DC wedding photographer? Like, you're not in a position to even be able to handle that at this time. Right. And so it just is a good example of how we do sort of focus on those things that we see other people doing, and somebody who's been in business for 11 years and they do this and I have to do that now. It's very easy to get distracted away from the fundamental things of like, what are your skills? Who do you want to help? And how are you going to help them?
Yeah, that's good. So obviously when we have a business, because we don't want it to be a hobby, we have to get our first client. So what is the recommendation that you have, just briefly? I know that you cover this more in your coaching and your programs and stuff, but how do you get that first client?
Yeah. I mean, I think 99% of the time, there are people, like I've had a few clients that were starting their business with like an email list and a social media following, because they sort of were, I have a client who's a body image coach, but she started out, she had a body image Instagram account, and then she started an email list. So she sort of had some things she was working with. Most people don't have that.
Yep.
And so I think a lot of people, when they're starting a business, they want to start with content and social media. And I think if you want to engage in social media and content marketing, it's good to get started early, because that in itself requires some development of skill and honing of messaging and all of that stuff. But that's not where your first client is going to come from. Your first client is not going to come from your blog if you're just getting started. It's going to come from your personal and professional network. And if you cannot talk to your friends and your family about what you're doing, you probably aren't going to have success on social media either.
Right.
So leveraging the network of relationships that you have is absolutely where you should start. And not just your personal and professional network, but your business is going to exist within an industry. No matter what your business is, you're going to exist in some sort of existing space. Most people aren't inventing something totally brand new. And so leveraging your personal and professional network, and then intentionally building relationships with the people in your industry is where you should start. And you don't need a website. You don't need a branding. You don't need any of those external things in order to do that. And there is a misconception, because sometimes people think like, well, my friends and family aren't my ideal client, so networking isn't going to work for me.
Right.
But that's not true either, because like you are extremely experienced with networking. Networking isn't just about who you already know. It's about who they know.
Right.
And who they know. And so if you are just getting started and you're ready to get that first client, the magical phrase is looking to connect. Like send a note to, your uncle or your college friend that you haven't, that you have a relationship with, and you have a rapport, and say like, hey, I wanted to let you know about this new thing that I'm starting to do. I'm really excited about it. I'm looking to connect with people who, and then fill in the type of person that you're trying to help.
Yeah.
I'd appreciate any introductions that you would be willing to make, and then see what happens.
Yeah. And here's the thing too, like this is all of you guys that are listening to this, you've heard me talk about networking a zillion times. This should not be a new concept to you. And we've talked about how to overcome the fear of somebody thinking you're silly or you're weird or whatever. But really it's about, how do I get connected to the people that they're connected with? I tell the story of like when I was trying to make a big career transition, but I wasn't really sure if what I wanted to do was actually what I wanted to do. I reached out to my friends and family and said, I know you don't do this, but do you know somebody who does? It's the same idea, but for your business. And you'd be surprised that people would be like, oh my gosh, I would love to hear more about your business. Or, oh my goodness, yeah, I actually know this one person. And that's how I found my first client, the exact same way I found my first client. So it was through a friend of a friend of a friend. That was literally how I found my first client.
Yeah. How I found my first client was I was sending, I've talked about like, I forced myself basically to send 5 emails a day to my friends and family network. And one of the people that I emailed posted my contact information in a Facebook group that she was in. Yeah. And one of those people that she didn't even know reached out to me and was like, I need help. And it was like a $6,000 client, was my very first client, because she needed help with a lot of different stuff. And it was all stuff that I could do. And so it wasn't even somebody that even knew the person that I had emailed. They were just in a Facebook group together, and she really needed help with what, with the area that I work with. And so you never really, with networking, I'm sure you've talked about this before and experienced this before. It's like the people that you in your head are like, this person can definitely help me. Somehow always is like disappointing. But then the person that you're like, there's no way that this person has anything to offer me, that totally comes through with like some clutch connection. And so it's really important not to prejudge, and make up excuses in your head of why, XYZ person isn't going to be able to help, because you just never know.
You just never know. I love that. So it sounds to me, so we've established for ourselves, okay, first do we want to actually start a business? Do we have the skills? We've talked about that. A lot of you probably do have skills to start your own service-based business. You don't need any capital. You don't need a fancy branding website. That stuff can come later. What you need is some skills. You need an audience to serve, and you need to know how to serve them. And then finally, you have some ideas on how to generate that first client. I would love to hear, now you do this all the time. This is so helpful for us. But like, if people are like, gosh, I want to really dive deeper into this. I'm ready to be committed. I'm ready to actually show up for myself in my business, in my career. I'm ready to launch the thing I've been thinking about forever. And here's the deal, guys. I've said this before, if you have an entrepreneurial itch, and I tell this to my clients, that itch is probably never going to go away until you try something and do something about it. Just talking to somebody yesterday, she was like, I've been thinking about this for 5 years. If you've been thinking about something for more than 6 months, I want you to do something about it. Right. So let alone 5 years. So if you're listening to this and you're like, this is my sign, how can people talk to us a little bit about your program, Business from Scratch? And I would love to, just tell us a little bit more about that program.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say, probably a lot of people that are listening to this episode, you currently have, some sort of traditional job,
right?
And starting a side hustle while you are, gainfully employed is a great place to be. Time. Because it's a very safe, you might have some challenges in terms of, time constraints and whatnot, but we've talked about how with a very small amount of time, you can get a really good sense of whether a side hustle is going to be worth pursuing. Mm-hmm. And so starting a side hustle while you have a traditional job is a great way to test the waters. If you are thinking about starting something on your own. And so I created a coaching program called Business from Scratch, which is somewhat self-explanatory. Because one of the reasons I created it is because if you have started dabbling in the entrepreneurship space, this. It's like the second you think the word small business, all of a sudden there is so much information that's getting thrown at you. Yeah. There's, Facebook starts hammering you with ads about Pinterest and building your email list and how to make $1 million. And there's just so much information out there. Mm-hmm. And that information overload oftentimes keeps people stuck in what they're doing, and it makes it seem impossible to get started. And so my program Business from Scratch is designed to really cut through that noise and do the things that we've been talking about today. Create the simplest possible version of your thing so that you can get it out there and test it and see if it's going to be a viable way for you to make a living. So I want to help aspiring entrepreneurs and side hustlers, or even people that have been out of the workforce and trying to get back into the workforce via a business. I want to help them launch their businesses and land their very first clients without getting bogged down in building a website or spending $10K on branding or any of that stuff. So that's the design of it. And I try to keep it super simple and stripped down, while also giving people, the actual information that you need to start a business and do things the right way.
Yeah, I love that. And folks, that I don't really ever promote anybody else's programs. I don't think ever on this podcast, but I do think that there's such a need for this right now. And I know that my audience that's listening, you may be thinking like, it's time for me to start this side hustle. I'm totally with you that it is a risk-free way, especially if you're already employed. And even if you got laid off, it's a great way to break up your job search. Even if you're trying to still find a job and you're like, you know what, maybe I want to start this side hustle thing and maybe it will actually gain some momentum. Is a great time right now to be doing this. And I think the other thing that you mentioned that I just want to cover too, a lot of objections I get from people is like, well, I don't want my employer to know, so I can't be posting online. You're giving them the exact examples of how they don't actually need to do that to get their first client. So I think that is absolutely amazing. And guys, if you are interested in launching your own business, if you've been thinking about it for a while, if you've been thinking about it for more than 6 months and you want help and a blueprint on how to do it and get that, easiest viable option up there, the easiest viable product, I highly, highly, highly recommend Katie. She's amazing. She's the real deal. There's so many business coaches out there that I have a lot of opinions about that actually don't know what they're doing, but she actually does. And this program is going to help you go from having no business to having something where you're getting clients in the door. Where can people find out more about it?
Yeah. So the best way is I'm going to be doing a free class on March 23rd. And I think We're going to link that up in the show notes to really the purpose of the training is to walk you through kind of the step-by-step. Here are the things that you need to do to get the first client in the door. Mm-hmm. I'll also be sharing more information about the coaching program on that call, if that's something that you're interested in. But, I've had people that attended the webinar, didn't sign up for the program. And then they DM me on Instagram and they're like, oh my gosh, I got my first client. It's 6 days later after the training. And so I think that regardless of whether you would like help with this process or whether you are going to, go it on your own, it's definitely a worthwhile use of your time to get a systematic approach to doing this.
Yeah. So we are going to link that up in the show notes. And the other thing that I would say is if you're watching the webinar that she's going to do, the masterclass or whatnot, and you're like, gosh, I really need help with this. We talk about investing in yourselves a lot on this program, because if you can get there faster, and if you've been thinking about it for a long time, she is the real deal. And it is not going to be, you're going to get a return on investment if you're investing in this, and it's the long-term in your career. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and sharing your story. And if you guys want to check out her masterclass, we're going to have the link for that. But where else can people find you? Where do you like to hang out?
So I'm on Instagram at Katie Wussow.
And can you spell your last name? Yeah.
Yeah. It's a doozy. It's W-U, S as in Sam, O-W.
Love it.
When I got engaged, my mother-in-law was like, listen, every time you spell your name, you need to do it just like that. Otherwise, you're just going to have to repeat it. I was like, okay. W-U, S as in Sam, O-W. Got it. So it's Katie Wussow on Instagram. And then I also have a podcast called The Game Changer, where it's a business podcast for people that have service-based businesses. And I try to keep it super practical. You guys, you've been listening to this whole conversation. I'm not really, a rah-rah kind of gal. I like to give you the practical information that you actually need to build a profitable business. So you can find that on all the podcast places as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And guys, can't wait to hear what your response is to this. I would love to hear what your biggest takeaway was from this conversation. You know where to find me, over on LinkedIn or over on Instagram. That's where I hang out the most, and would love to see what your biggest takeaway was. All right, till next week. Thanks for listening to the Recruit the Employer podcast. If you've been loving this podcast and it's been helping you approach your career in a brand new way, I have 2 shameless asks. Number 1, make sure you hit subscribe right this very second. That way you won't miss a single episode. And number 2, would you give us a review? Reviews help other ambitious career women like you know that this podcast is the place to be, and helps the podcast climb to the top of the charts. Think of it as some good career karma. And as always, if you want to learn more about the topics we discussed today, or are ready to take massive action and invest in yourself and your career, we would be honored to help you. Head on over to recruittheemployer.com/call to book your free strategy session. Regardless, we will see you next week.